Deep in the heart of an ancient jungle, where the air hums with the whispers of life, a story unfolds. A story of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between two souls, one human, one beast. He was known as Koba, the protector, a leader among his kind, a guardian of his family, a legend in the untamed world. His story, however, would not be written in roars of dominance, but in the silence of sacrifice. In the dense wilderness, where shadows dance between towering trees, a young girl named Lena watched. Her eyes, wide with curiosity, followed the mighty silverback as he moved, strong, commanding, yet strangely gentle. Their worlds could not have been more different, yet something unspoken bound them together. Not with words nor with gestures, but with something deeper, an understanding, a trust that defied reason. But fate has little regard for innocence, and danger does not wait for the strong to be ready. The jungle was changing. A threat loomed in the distance, creeping closer with every passing moment. And soon, the bond between them would be tested in ways neither could foresee. This is the story of a hero, a guardian, a sacrifice that would echo through time. This is Koba's story. The jungle was more than just trees and shadows. It was alive, breathing, whispering its secrets to those who listened. And among its countless inhabitants was Koba, the mighty silverback. His presence alone commanded respect. Every movement, slow and deliberate, spoke of power restrained by wisdom. He was not just a leader, he was the heart of his troop, the protector of those who relied on him. His family, his kind, moved as one, guided by his silent authority. The young ones played under his watchful gaze, the mothers groomed their offspring, and the elders found peace in his presence. But Koba's world extended beyond his own. Unbeknownst to him, another pair of eyes watched from a distance, filled with wonder, fascination, and something far deeper, connection. Lena had always known the jungle as home. She had no memory of a different life, no recollection of walls or cities. Raised near the wild, she understood its rhythm, its dangers, its unspoken rules. But nothing fascinated her more than Koba. She had watched him from afar for as long as she could remember. There was something about him that was different from the others, something that drew her in. He was not just an animal, he was something else, a presence, a force, a guardian of a world she longed to understand. At first she had been careful, keeping her distance, hiding behind thick trees and tangled vines. But curiosity has a way of pulling us forward, step by step, until fear is forgotten. Lena began moving closer. She studied his habits, his movements, the way he cared for his family. And Koba, though aware of her presence, never showed signs of hostility. He did not chase her away. He did not growl in warning. He simply let her be. A silent acknowledgement, an invisible thread that tied them together. And so, the jungle had found a new rhythm, one where the girl and the gorilla existed within each other's world, unspoken but understood. Some days, Lena would sit on the edge of the clearing, watching as Koba led his troop to the river. Other days, she would mimic the way the young gorillas played, copying their movements with a quiet smile. And sometimes, in the golden light of the evening, she and Koba would simply lock eyes across the distance. Two beings from different worlds, yet somehow the same. Trust is not built in a moment. It is woven slowly, thread by thread, through time and patience. And without a single word exchanged, trust had begun to grow between them. But the jungle was a place of balance, and where there is peace, there is also danger. Lena did not know it yet, but the bond she had formed with Koba would soon be tested in a way that neither of them could have ever imagined. The jungle was never silent. Even in the stillness of night, it pulsed with life. Chirps of crickets, distant howls, rustling leaves. But on this day, The air carried a different sound, something unnatural. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, too steady to belong to an animal. The birds quieted. The monkeys hid high in the trees. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Something was coming. Lena didn't notice it at first. She was perched on a fallen log, watching Koba and his troop move through the clearing. The young gorillas tumbled and played, their laughter like hoots filling the air. Koba, ever watchful, sat nearby, his dark eyes scanning the horizon. And then he stopped. His body stiffened, his nostrils flaring slightly as he caught a scent carried by the wind. A scent that did not belong. Lena saw it too, the sudden shift in Koba's posture, the way the other gorillas grew still. A deep instinct stirred in her, a whisper of warning at the back of her mind. Then, from somewhere beyond the trees, a sound cracked through the jungle like a sharp breath. Metal clinking, boots crushing leaves. Lena's heart pounded. She turned toward the noise, eyes wide, breath caught in her throat. Through the dense undergrowth, dark figures emerged, moving low, careful, their hands gripping long barrels of steel. Poachers. They had come before, hunting the creatures of the jungle, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. But this time, they weren't after just any animal. They were after Koba. His size, his strength, he was a prize worth more than all the others. Lena's fingers clenched into fists. She had heard the stories. She knew what happened when men like these came. They would set traps, use weapons, tear families apart for greed. She glanced back at Koba, who still had not moved, his muscles coiled beneath his thick fur. He knew, just as she did, that danger was here. Then came the voices, low and hushed, but clear enough for Lena to hear. "That's the one," a man whispered. "The big one. We take him. We take them all." Her stomach twisted. A part of her wanted to run, to get away before she was seen. But another part, the part that had spent years watching Koba, understanding him, knew she could not. She would not. She had to warn him. She had to do something. She turned back to the gorilla, her mind racing. If she could just make him leave, lead him away before it was too late. But Koba was not a creature ruled by fear. He was a leader, a protector, and he would not abandon his family. A hand reached for a rifle, a finger curled around a trigger, and in that moment, Lena knew. This was only the beginning. Lena's breath came in short, frantic gasps. Her heart pounded so loudly she swore the poachers could hear it. They were closing in, their boots pressing into the damp jungle floor, their eyes locked onto Koba. The gorilla remained still, his massive form blending into the shadows of the trees, but Lena knew stillness did not mean safety. She had to act, now. Her mind raced. Running was useless. If she moved too suddenly, they would see her. If she called out, they might shoot. But she had learned from the jungle, from Koba himself. Sometimes survival was not about strength. It was about instinct. And instinct told her she had to create a distraction, something big enough to draw them away. She reached into the small satchel slung across her shoulder, fingers shaking as they brushed against the cool metal shells of her firecrackers. Her uncle had given them to her long ago, warning her to use them only if she ever needed to scare away predators. These men were no different. Swallowing her fear, she gripped one tightly, crawled behind the thick roots of a towering tree, and lit the fuse. A second passed, then another, then... Bang! The firecracker exploded in the distance, sending a sharp, cracking sound through the jungle. Birds shrieked and erupted from the treetops in a flurry of wings. The poachers spun around, weapons raised, their attention snapping toward the noise. "What was that?" one of them barked. "Over there," another answered. "Something moved." Lena didn't wait. She grabbed another, struck the fuse, and threw it in the opposite direction. Another explosion rang out, louder, closer. The jungle erupted into chaos. The poachers cursed, their tight formation breaking as they turned to face the unseen threat. In the confusion, some stumbled back, others raised their rifles, scanning the trees. And that was all she needed. Lena scrambled to her feet and ran toward Koba. The massive gorilla turned his head slightly, his deep eyes locking onto hers. For a brief moment, there was no fear between them, no hesitation, just trust. She motioned for him to go, to lead his troop away before the poachers recovered. But Koba did not move. A flicker of something passed through his gaze, understanding, resolve. He was not running. He would not leave his family behind. And Lena realized, with a sinking heart, that Koba had already made his decision. The jungle held its breath. Smoke from the firecrackers curled through the air, mixing with the thick scent of damp earth. The poachers, momentarily scattered, began to regroup, their rifles raised, eyes scanning the trees. The confusion was fading. Soon, they would see through the trick. Soon, they would find their true target. Lena's pulse pounded in her ears as she turned back to Koba. "Go," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. But the great silverback did not move. His dark eyes flickered between Lena and his troop, and in that moment, she knew. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to leave them behind. A sharp voice cut through the air. "There, the big one!" Lena's breath caught as one of the poachers raised his rifle, the barrel gleaming under the fractured sunlight. Time slowed. She saw the man's finger press against the trigger. She saw Koba straighten to his full height, his massive chest rising and falling. And then, before the shot could ring out, Koba charged. The ground shook beneath his weight as he thundered forward, a force of nature, a wall of muscle and fury. The poacher barely had time to react before Koba was upon him, a powerful arm swiping the gun from his hands and sending it flying into the undergrowth. The man screamed, stumbling backward as the gorilla roared, a deep, guttural sound that sent shivers through the air. Chaos erupted. The other poachers shouted, scrambling to take aim. But Koba did not stop. He grabbed another man, tossing him aside like a broken twig. The jungle echoed with screams, gunshots, and the primal roar of a beast who would not let his family fall. Lena pressed herself against a tree, heart hammering. She wanted to help. She wanted to do something, anything. But this was Koba's fight now, and he was not backing down. A sharp crack split the air, the sound of a gun firing. Koba staggered. Lena's breath caught in her throat as she saw the red bloom against his dark fur. A bullet had struck his shoulder, but Koba did not fall. He turned, his massive hands curling into fists, his breath coming in heavy, ragged gasps. He was hurt, but he was not finished. The poachers hesitated now, fear creeping into their eyes. Koba was too strong, too wild, too unwilling to break. But then, another shot. And another. This time, Koba's legs wavered. His great body lurched forward, catching himself on his knuckles. Lena let out a cry, her feet moving before her mind could stop them. "No!" she screamed, running toward him, but the jungle was unforgiving. Koba lifted his head, his eyes finding hers once more, and in them she saw everything. The fight, the love, the sacrifice. And then, with one last shuddering breath, Koba fell. The jungle seemed to collapse into silence. The echoes of gunfire faded into the thick air, swallowed by the trees, by the earth, by the very heart of the wild. Lena stood frozen, her breath caught somewhere between a sob and a scream. Koba lay motionless, his massive form stretched across the ground, his dark fur matted with blood. The mighty protector, the guardian of the jungle, had fallen. The poachers, still gripping their weapons, hesitated. Some took cautious steps forward, their eyes flickering between Koba's body and the dense jungle around them. They had come for a prize, for the thrill of the hunt, but what they had faced was something beyond their understanding. Koba had not run. He had not cowered. He had fought, not for himself, but for something greater. And that made them afraid. Lena's hands curled into fists. A fire burned in her chest, a raw, searing pain that had nothing to do with fear. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. Koba wasn't supposed to die. Her legs moved before her mind could stop them, carrying her forward until she stood between the poachers and the fallen silverback. "Leave!" she spat, her voice shaking but strong. "You have no right to be here." One of the men, the leader, stepped closer, rifle still in hand. He looked at her, then at Koba, then at the jungle around them. The weight of the moment pressed down like a storm ready to break. Then, slowly, he signaled to the others. Without another word, the poachers turned and disappeared into the trees, their boots crunching against the earth, their presence vanishing like ghosts in the mist. Lena fell to her knees beside Koba. Her fingers trembled as they brushed against his arm, still warm, still strong despite the stillness. Tears blurred her vision. She had never felt so small, so powerless. The jungle had lost its guardian. She had lost her friend. A soft rustling broke the silence. She looked up to see Koba's troop lingering at the edge of the clearing. The younger gorillas clung to their mothers, their dark eyes wide with confusion. The elders stood motionless, their sorrow etched in the way they held themselves. They had seen what had happened. They had lost him, too. For the first time since she could remember, the jungle felt empty. But as Lena looked around, at the trees, at the sky, at the creatures Koba had fought to protect, she realized something. He was gone, but his spirit, his legacy, would never fade. The jungle would remember. The earth would carry his story. And she, Lena, would make sure his sacrifice was never forgotten. She wiped her tears, her heart heavy but determined. Then, standing tall, she turned toward the jungle and led the gorillas away, back into the world Koba had given his life to protect. And as they disappeared into the shadows, the wind carried a final whisper, a promise that he would always be watching, always guarding, always a part of the wild he had loved so fiercely. Days passed, but the jungle did not forget. The echoes of Koba's final stand lingered in the rustling of the leaves, in the distant calls of the birds, in the quiet footsteps of those who still roamed beneath the canopy. Lena felt his presence everywhere. Every time the wind brushed against her skin, every time the river carried the songs of the wild, she knew Koba was still here. She had stayed with the troop, watching over them as Koba once had. The younger ones, though still playful, moved with a sense of caution, their eyes searching for the leader who no longer walked beside them. The mothers stayed close, their movements gentle but tense, as if waiting for a protector who would never return. And Lena, she felt the weight of something she had never known before: responsibility, loss, a duty that had not been hers before, but had now been placed in her hands. One evening, as the sun bled gold and crimson across the sky, she sat near the riverbank, staring at the rippling water. She could still see Koba in her mind, strong, fearless, wise. She remembered the way he watched over his family, the way he had trusted her, the way he had fought, not for himself, but for them. And that was when she understood. Koba hadn't just been a guardian of the jungle, he had been a teacher. He had shown her what it meant to protect something bigger than herself. And now, it was her turn. Determination burned in her chest. She couldn't change what had happened, but she could make sure it never happened again. The poachers would return, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. And when they did, she would be ready. She would fight for Koba's memory, for the jungle he had loved, for the creatures who still depended on him. She rose to her feet, her hands curling into fists. She would find others who cared, who understood. She would spread Koba's story, make the world see what had been lost and what could still be saved. His sacrifice would not be in vain. because as long as she carried his spirit in her heart, Koba would never truly be gone. The jungle was still alive. It would always be alive. And now, it had a new protector. The jungle moved on, as it always did. The trees stretched toward the sky, their leaves whispering stories of the past. The rivers carved their paths through the earth, carrying the pulse of life forward. And the animals, though forever marked by the loss of their guardian, continued to roam, to survive, to live. But something had changed. A new presence walked among them. Not a silverback, not a beast of the wild, but a girl who had learned its ways. Lena. She no longer watched from the shadows. She no longer hesitated at the edge of the clearing. She walked with purpose, stepping into the role Koba had left behind. The young gorillas followed her, trusting her as they once trusted him. The elders watched, their dark eyes knowing, understanding. She was not their leader, but she was something else, something just as important. A protector. A voice for the voiceless. But Lena knew the jungle's greatest threat did not come from within. It came from beyond, from those who saw the land not as a home, but as something to be taken, to be sold, to be destroyed. She had seen it happen once. She would not let it happen again. She traveled beyond the trees, to the villages, to the people who had forgotten the language of the wild. She told Koba's story, not just to mourn him, but to make others understand. She spoke of the poachers, of the danger, of the cost of silence. And slowly, the world listened. Rangers came, patrols strengthened. The jungle watched over not just by its own, but by those who finally saw its worth. Lena returned often, her heart forever bound to the land that had raised her. The troops still roamed, safe under the thick canopy, their movements a quiet tribute to the one who had given his life for them. And though Koba was gone, his spirit lingered in every rustling leaf, in every whispered breeze. The jungle had not forgotten him, and neither had she. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, she stood at the edge of the clearing where it had all begun. The golden light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows that danced like memories. She closed her eyes, listening, to the wind, to the river, to the soft sounds of life moving forward. And in that stillness, she could almost hear it, a deep, steady breath, a presence watching, protecting. Koba was here. He always would be.